This video will examine the melee-based head-on sword combat, where you must defeat enemies one by one. This slower, precise combat differs from hack-and-slash games that focus on quick combos against multiple enemies at once. Specifically, I'll discuss games that require you to lock onto and defeat foes through parrying and dodging a few times each. The primary factor determining good or bad melee combat is how enemies react to player strikes. When combat feels satisfying, it's likely because enemies react appropriately with brief stuns after each hit. Every strike should influence enemies, either by breaking their guard, destroying their weapons, or causing them to stagger. Simply put, attacks must change enemies' animations. In God of War and Sekiro, nearly all foes visually react to your attacks, unless they are gigantic in size. Unfortunately, many games disregard this fundamental rule, resulting in hollow, inauthentic combat, leaving the player with no eagerness to defeat enemies. To balance the difficulty without oversimplifying it, enemies usually have combat animations that cannot be interrupted once started. During these animations, your blows do not affect them. This is when we have to dodge or parry until the animation ends. But how often should such animations occur? Well, it depends on the combat designers and the difficulty. Higher difficulties should feature them more frequently to make it more challenging. The combat in the Witcher game is trash mainly because these animations don't happen regularly, even on harder difficulties, allowing players to mindlessly attack until the enemy is defeated. Games need to have hit stops to have a sense of impact and weighty combat. Look how Kratos' axe briefly sticks to enemies. After each hit, the weapon stops for a tiny moment. The stops must be swift and brief, otherwise the combat will feel clumsy and clunky. Hit stops only work for games with a heavy and steady combat system. If developers want to have a fast and fluid combat, they should stay away from it or confine them to finishers, because obviously it slows things down. This is why games like Sekiro, Ghost of Tsushima, or Team Ninja titles like Nioh don't feature this mechanic, because they prioritize being fluent and responsive over heaviness. Instead, these games use dismemberment and something that I call exaggerated hit effects. Blood splash and blood splatters are also pleasing, even for folks with a fear of blood, and they perfectly demonstrate impact throughout attacks and finishers in fast-paced games. However, these blood effects can also be employed in slower games, since the number of attacks is a lot higher in games such as Rise of Ronin. Blood and dismemberment are one of the finest ways to demonstrate the impact of player strikes. Many people say games need to have many different attacking animations to avoid repetitiveness. I disagree with this. Almost all of the games with a good combat system mostly have one or two animations for the light and heavy attacks, and developers usually prefer to make new animations for different type of weapons, instead of making multiple animations only for one weapon. Finisher and execution animations are where the animators can stand out and enjoy their work. It's one of the reliable ways to not have a repetitive and boring combat. Some of the early Assassin's Creed games like Brotherhood or AC3 had cool finishers despite their combat being quite plain and basic. Ghost of Tsushima is one of the recent examples that focuses a lot on attacking animations and the way enemies die. A large part of the satisfaction we get from playing this game is because of its realistic animations. Sound effects also play a vital role in shaping the combat system. The truth is, getting the sound of clashing and deflecting swords right is complex. After all this time, games like Thymesia still struggle to mix sound effects well with background songs or any other audio in the game. All the sounds need to be audible. When it comes to deflecting and parrying, as you know, Sekiro does it best. Since the whole systems of the game are based on blocking and timing, deflecting is the loudest sound you hear during gameplay. Additionally, if dismemberment is in the game, it must accurately depict the sounds of a slicing flesh. On top of that, listen to Kratos whenever he attacks enemies. He grunts when he hits them, and it gives weight to his blows. I think Witcher games could improve their combat if Geralt let out a slight grunt with every attack. However, while grunting is usually used in fighting games, it suits slower paced combat systems in other games too. There are other things that can make the combat better or worse. For example, if the game is loot focused, like all Team Ninja games, the way enemies drop their items can significantly affect players' enjoyment of the game. Nevertheless, the aforementioned mechanics form the foundation of melee combat in every game, so whenever you're enjoying or hating a game's combat, it's probably because they got these elements right or wrong.